5 years since its controversial founder jumped bail, we'll examine the world of Wikileaks. And Destination Nowhere, why refugees from the world's war zones are trapped in asylum limbo. I'm Andrew Wilson. This is Insight. Welcome to Insight. 5 years ago, Julian Assange disappeared into the Ecuadorian embassy in London to avoid extradition to Sweden. Last month, Swedish prosecutors said they had discontinued their investigation into an allegation of rape, an allegation Mr. Assange has always denied. He's still in that embassy because he's wanted in the UK for skipping bail. But what about Wikileaks? It's the controversial whistleblowing website he founded and that turned him into a household name. Insight's Yasmin Khatun Diwan has a reminder of how it came to the world's attention.
Few can stir up discussion and division like Wikileaks. Since gaining fame in 2010, public perception of the non-profit organisation has changed drastically. From the fight for transparency to being observed with suspicion.
I think initially when Wikileaks began exposing government deception and human rights abuses, there was huge public support because this was quite clearly in the public interest. The public did have a right to know, the public believed they have a right to know, so there was a lot of support. I think over time, because of the sustained attacks against Wikileaks, some of that support has diminished.
Redaction.
Wikileaks emerged with the release of huge numbers of classified US documents, bringing it to the centre of discussion around public freedoms and security.
As Wikileaks stands under threat, so does the freedom of expression and the health of all our societies.
The documents detailed more than 250,000 classified cables from US embassies around the world, with extensive information from the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. Wikileaks was widely embraced by opponents of those wars and supporters of greater government transparency.
If it hadn't been for Chelsea Manning leaking the Iraq war logs and Wikileaks publishing them, we would have never known about that horrendous attack by the US forces on the Iraqi journalists and civilians, where the gunship was seen to shoot them down in the street. It's things like that which are clearly in the public interest that the US military and government sought to hide. They are operating on the basis of information received. They've not actually leaked anything, they're just publishing things that others have leaked. And according to them, the only leakers have sent them information about the US or US government, Hillary Clinton's emails, and so on.
In 2016, the then Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump declared he loved Wikileaks, following the emergence of 2,000 hacked emails from his opponent Hillary Clinton's campaign.
Because Putin has outsmarted her at every step of the way.
The damaging emails were thought to have played a central role in the elections and prompted questions over Wikileaks' partiality.
Some people have speculated that Wikileaks is getting its information from Russian state government hackers, and that they are effectively working with, by default, the Putin regime. Now, I can understand why people might say that, but there's no actual hard evidence.
The 45-year-old man at the top remains in the Ecuadorian embassy. He took refuge there 5 years ago to avoid extradition to Sweden over a rape allegation for which the prosecution has now been dropped. At the time, Julian Assange said he feared he would be handed over to the United States to face prosecution over Wikileaks. Key figures in the current US administration say his arrest remains a priority, with British authorities maintaining he'll be arrested should he leave the embassy. Wikileaks is responsible for publishing some of the largest information leaks in US history. But to this day, it continues to stir debate over its positioning as a tool for justice and transparency, as it claims, or a tool for political manipulation. Yasmin Khatun Diwan, reporting for Insight.
To discuss that further now, I'm joined by Jason Murdoch, who's the technology and cybersecurity reporter with the International Business Times. He's written extensively on online surveillance. Jason, thanks very much indeed for joining me.
Thank you very much.
Well, people in your kind of trade will presumably find today quite a significant day, because there's old Julian Assange has been in the embassy now for 5 years, a feat in itself, a physical feat just staying there. And still he, by and large, cuts to many people a heroic figure. They still feel that he's something of a sword of truth, a force of good, contained by the authorities. Is that fair, do you think?
I think when he went into the embassy in 2012, he was definitely seen as a heroic figure. I mean, they were coming off the back of a quite significant portion of leaks that were quite anti-establishment, quite left-leaning, if you want to go into that in the political side of it. I think when he went in, yes, he was a heroic figure, if you want to call it that. Kind of a figurehead for this leaking anti-surveillance type of movement, very pro-anonymous, pro-hacking groups. Now, that might have changed. As he's been in the embassy for the past 5 years, the world has almost changed as well.
The world's moved on.
The world has very much moved on. Politically, it's moved on. The leaks have continued emerging from his organization. They've kind of with diminishing returns, unfortunately, until last year, when that's where everything changed.
Has that re-upped the ante for WikiLeaks and the sense of respect or the sense of attention that it's garnered in the last 12 months because of what happened during the American election?
I'm not sure about respect, but definitely controversy and headlines. WikiLeaks are very much in the public domain again after dropping out for a few years, maybe. They were still publishing, but they weren't really grabbing the attention of the general public like they were. That changed, as you said, when they started releasing emails from the Democratic Party, and it hasn't stopped since.
What's your sense on that? Is that because there just aren't that many secrets out there that are worth publishing to the public, or that they're extremely hard to get hold of?
Well, WikiLeaks kind of seem to be, they work with what they're provided. That's their kind of line. There are a lot of secrets out there. Governments have a lot of secrets, and as long as there is whistleblowers willing to provide WikiLeaks with information, they'll be fueled like that.
It's almost the whistleblowers that are the players rather than WikiLeaks itself. I mean, WikiLeaks would like to, and Julian Assange would like to characterize himself and his organization as something that throws light into the shadows, that illuminates things that otherwise would remain in the dark. Others would say it's more like an organization that just recklessly throws grit into the machine to see what'll happen. What do you think of that?
They've had some controversy in the past with their redaction policies, if they even had redaction policies. I know whenever they were leaking Iraqi war logs, which the kind of batch was called, there was a lot of controversy over where names of civilians or government leaked kind of informants were they named in these batches of leaks, and they got into some trouble with that, yeah.
I mean, one would imagine there are plenty of other groups of people who would like to be as notorious as WikiLeaks, who would like to go creeping around in the stealthy shadows of the web and uncovering material. But it seems that they hold that center spot still. But with all the publicity now surrounding cybersecurity and hackers that putting out malware and ransomware and all that sort of thing, the net must be filling up with people that are patrolling it to their own ends.
It is. There are a lot of hacking groups and a lot of free speech and cybercrime groups now. They're working to similar ends, but none seem to have had the impact yet that WikiLeaks have had. And it's hard to put your finger on why that is. One may be that they have this figurehead of Julian Assange who's willing to take the public flak and the government kind of flak in the face of these massive, leaks of very sensitive information. A lot of the hacker groups that organize and hack into major businesses or corporations or governments, they will release information, but very rarely will it be as kind of widespread and as publicity driven.
So what about the whole issue of cybersecurity? A lot of experts or people who run enormous companies that write the code for security software that corporations buy, that governments use and so on, many of them now say privately, even publicly on occasion, that we are falling behind the dark side, that those that mean us harm on the internet, and particularly cyber criminals of one sort or other, are moving faster than the forces that try to protect us. Is that something you're coming across now?
I think it's always been the case that companies, governments, large organizations have to kind of protect themselves in a very broad spectrum, but the hacker only has to get in once for it to cause massive amounts of damage. I think that's where the problem really lies. that will continue to be the case, I think, forever.
But is that just because we don't really go after a burglar until we find someone's gone in through an open window, and so then we figure out how to close it? So there is a kind of reactive necessity to any kind of cybersecurity. We have to learn from the mistakes that cost people from time to time.
Absolutely. I think businesses are getting a little bit more proactive now. That is maybe the result of so much bad press surrounding data breaches and leaks, especially over the past few years. You know, we've seen Yahoo get completely demolished with leaks. We've seen TalkTalk become a major victim. The bad press and the bad PR, obviously, that goes along that is forcing businesses to become more proactive.
And on a private level, individuals, we understand that the banks are all busy chasing up cases of fraudulent behavior, often done through the internet, that we don't hear about, but that personal customers have an experience and the bank sorts it out for them. Meanwhile, we're all walking up and down the streets.